So we're continuing the Maamar Byom Ashtei that the Rebbe said for his birthday, 1971. What I want to do today, to begin, is read part of the summary, so it will update us to where we're at. So turn to page 240, because we're in the middle of this chapter. We'll finish it today, but the summary will give us a good idea. Okay? Summary. The soul's choice of Hashem stems from the essence of the soul. A level...
Sorry, what chapter is it?
We are in chapter 7, in middle, but I'm reading the summary at the end of chapter 7, page 240. And then we'll go back.
I'm on the online version, so.
So, do you have the summary in the online version?
Yes. I
Okay.
have one. Yeah, the soul's choice of God.
Okay, that's what I'm reading. The soul's choice of Hashem stems from the essence of the soul, a level that transcends intellect. In other words, intellect is not the essence. It's a tool for the essence, but it's not the essence. So when we say that the soul chooses Hashem, we're saying that the essence of the soul chooses God. Perhaps one can add that when this choice is drawn down from the essence and has an effect on the intellect, it elevates the soul, to a loftier rung than its natural inherent level. And what this means is, as great as the soul is, but when intellect kind of supports the soul becomes greater. The soul is more manifest. In other words, it's not just in the transcendence that there is the choice, but even the mind understands and chooses Hashem. That's what he said in this chapter, in this paragraph. Next paragraph. This can be understood by prefacing with a concept explained in the Siddur Imdach, that's the Alter Rebbe Siddur with the discourses of the Mittler Rebbe. Imdach, Dach is an acronym from Divrei Elokim Chayim, words of the living God, i.e. Chassidus. What does it say there? That the divine blessings granted to those who transgress God's will are like, quote, an aside, like one who gives something to another by throwing it over the shoulder. He's not really interested in giving it to him, but he has to give it to him. To explain by analogy, it's like a king who makes a celebratory feast for his prominent officers and prestigious servants. Now, I want you to notice that we have two different kinds. One is prominent officers, and one is prestigious servants. Now, even lowly servants and maids, which is another kind, receive leftovers from the feast. And finally, the fourth category, even dogs, feast on the bones that were discarded. But, of course, the king had no intention of spending money on them. The leftovers they receive are given merely as an aside. Similarly, in the analog, those who violate Hashem's will receive sustenance as an aside. It is given to them begrudgingly. Okay. The details of the analogy the Maamar says that Rebbe are significant. The two examples of those who receive sustenance as an aside and do not sit at the king's table, that is, the servants and maids and the dogs, and the two examples of those who do sit at the king's table, which are the prominent officers and the prestigious servants parallel 4 levels in the analog. Next page, 241. On the lowest level are the dogs. Why? They do not serve the king. They are motivated solely by their own desire that material things be given to them. So it's not about the king, Chevra, it's about the dogs. On a higher level are the lowly servants who do not enter the king's presence. They do serve, however, the king, but only out of compulsion, because they fear that otherwise they will be beaten. Serving the king runs contrary to their will and their pleasure. Therefore, they are not worthy of sitting at the king's table. So that's a second group. The first are the dogs. They get the bones. Then there are these low servants who don't get to the table because they're not really interested. They're not interested, not really. They are not interested, Chaim Zev, in serving the king. Why do they do that? Because if they don't, they're going to get beaten. So they're scared. Next paragraph. In contrast, the third category, the prestigious servants, serve the king willingly. This is their desire. True, their service is primarily motivated by the acceptance of the king's yoke. Nevertheless, he accepts that yoke willingly and with desire. In the analog, the person desires to accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, he is worthy of a place at the king's table. And finally, on a higher level than this are the king's officers. They comprehend the virtues of the king, and therefore they love him. So we have dogs, low servants who are afraid they'll be beaten, higher servants who accept what the king wants, but it's done with acceptance, obedience. And the fourth category are those prestigious ministers who understand the king and therefore they love the king. So until the fourth category, love is not part of the equation. Now, next paragraph. The category of officers itself subdivides into several levels. In general, there are 2 levels, ordinary officers and prominent officers. It is possible to say that these 3 categories found at the king's table, 1, prestigious servants, 2, ordinary officers, and number 3, prominent officers, correspond to the 3 types of officers: the duke, the prefect, and the commander, which is whom the above-mentioned Midrash describes as accompanying the king. The description the Midrash gives that they accompany the king resembles the concept mentioned in the analogy that the prestigious servants and officers sit at the king's table. On this basis, it is possible to offer further insight concerning the Midrash cited above. Although the obvious analog to the duke, the prefect, and the commander are the 70 patron angels of Klippas Noga, since the officers are described as accompanying the king, they can also be understood as referring to angels whose identity is subsumed in godliness, and even to the spheres of Atzilus. On this basis, one can further comprehend the extent of the cleverness of the person who states, quote, "I will choose the king." He wants the king alone, not any intermediaries, not even one bonded with the king. Even one that's bonded with the king is still not the king. This relates to the Baal Shem Tov's well-known analogy explaining the phrase in Tehillim, a prayer of poor, tefillah le'oni, person who pours Hashem yishpach sichli out his soul before God. The poor person wants nothing else but to come before the king. So now, let's turn back to page 235. The last word on the page, going on to 236. Uvesarim, when it comes, next page, Gufa, within ministers themselves, officers, Yeshnam kama v'kama dargis. There are various levels. And the Rebbe says, Shenechlokes b'chlolos l'shlayim, which we will divide generally into two categories. A, Sorim Stam, ordinary officers, and B, the Sorim Gedolim, and great officers. Yesh Leimar, so the Rebbe says, the Gimel Sugim Elu, these three categories, Shenimtsoyim b'shulchan HaMelech, that are found at the king's feast, at his table. And what are the three categories? He says in the brackets, look, Avodim Chshuvim is number one, prestigious servants. Category number two, Sorim, ministers, officers. And category number three, the Sorim Gedolim, great officers. These three categories, let's continue, Heim Behesim, they correspond Legimul Hasugim Shebemedish, to the three categories mentioned in the Midrash that we started this Maamar with, which are Duchsin, the dukes, the Ifrechin, he says it's called prefects, the Istritulin, and commanders. Shenimtsoyim Yachedim HaMelech, they come to the country. They come there, they come together with the king. Beloshen HaMedrash, in the words of the Medrash, V'hayu imai, that's in quotes. They were together with the Medrash. They were together with the king. The king comes into the Medina, and who follows him? These three categories of people. B'dugmas avodim, says the Rebbe, that these three categories of Duchsin, Ifrechin, and Istritulin are similar to the three categories in this mushal that's brought in the Maamar of the Alter Rebbe, in the Maamar, in the Sidrim Dach, in Avodim Ayinu, which are, it says, B'dugmas Avodim Achshuvim, they are the prestigious servants, Hasorim, the second category are officers, and Shenimtsoyim b'shulchan HaMelech, and then there are great ones that are at the table. So all three are at the table. Well, Pizeh Yesh Levai, says the Rebbe, with this we can explain Dagam Shakavona b'Pashtus b'Duchsin, that although in the analog, the meaning of the dukes, Hilashivim Asarim, the Noiga, refers to what we call in Kabbalah the 70 ministers of the translucent light. Kimavu Leil Madrushim, the Rebbe says, as we mentioned earlier from different discourses that say that. Mikol Mokaim, we're going on to the next page, 237. Nevertheless, Zem Shemedayik, the fact that the Medrash says Shehaduchsin Hoyu Imai, that the dukes were together with the king, who Bichdei Rames, it alludes to the fact Shemedaber Khan, that here he's discussing Leirak Bashivim Sorim, not only the 70 ministers Shehem Yesh Redober Fnei Atzmai, the 70 ministers of the non-Jewish nations are all egotists, selfish. Tugmas avodim hapchusim, they would be compared to the low type of servants. Shemekoimam, whose place is not at the table. It's mechutz l'shulchan hamelech. They don't get even to come to the table. Why? Because they don't really care about the melech. So the Ayin Sorim, you hear this? The 70 ministers that govern the 70 non-Jewish nations are comparable to the low servants that don't get to the king's table. They're still servants. They do a job. They give energy to the non-Jewish nations, which Hashem wants, for whatever reason. Elo, but the Rebbe says, if we're talking about the duchsin, it refers to malochim, to angels, shehem betelim lelikus, who are nullified, subservient to godliness, ulamaila yosin, even greater, the besviras datzilus, they're at a level where they're subservient to, we're also referring to a higher godly experience than the angelic experience, which is the spheres of Atzilus. She'iu v'chayev v'gamei ochad, in Atzilus, both the energies, the lights, and the receptacles, the kelim, are all one. Shem tomid and hamelech, they're always with the king. Afal pi. So the Rebbe says, based on this, that we're referring to not just Ayin Sorim of Klippa, right? But we're referring to Malachim. And we're even referring to the Sfiras Datzilus. Moving, it's understood. Next page. Goydul Pchikusa Shelzeh. We understand even more now the cleverness of the one who said, I want to be with the king. Ano Nosiv Malka. The Noisel Zeh she'ena reitze lekabel hashpa'aseh b'dukbas haklovim. In addition to the fact that the clever guy doesn't want to receive his effluence like the dogs receive their bones. The gamleim kavodim amshtachivim hapchusim shemechutz l'shulchan melech. And he's clever. He doesn't even, and he doesn't want. He also doesn't want to receive any affluence like the servants who are low in their, low servants who do it because they're afraid they'll be beaten, which don't get to the table. They're outside of the king's table. And although he realizes that what these servants get is lots of affluence, he says, I don't care. I don't want that. What does he want to be at the table of the king? Ella. He doesn't want the type of experience that the dukes have. And in the parentheses, all of these fascinations don't turn him on. Ella Bahamelech, he wants one thing, just the king. Ano Nosiv Malka, next page, 239. He wants to be with the king. So all your jewels and all your riches and all of your everything, he doesn't want that. He just wants the king. Uketayis Baal Shem Tov, and as explained in the teaching of the holy Baal Shem Tov, Hayadua, that's known, ala posik, it's worth memorizing this, on the verse, quote, Tfila li'oni chiyatov, the prayer of the poor. David's referring to himself. Kiyatov, when he enwraps himself, like with a talis. Ulifnei Hashem yishpach sichai, and before God, he pours out his soul. Right? Moshe is Tfilas Osher. Tfilah LaMoshe in Tehillim, the Gemara says, is the prayer of the wealthy, because Moshe was wealthy. David HaMelech, even though he was king, he was pursued and chased and everything else. So he looked at himself as oni, poor. Now, by the way, the Kabbalistic explanation is because David HaMelech is a melech, malchus, a king. Malchus is the 10th sphere, Hillel. Right? Malchus, it says in Kabbalah, doesn't have its own light. Les lo migarmo klum. It doesn't have any light of its own. It's a reflection of the spheres before. The 9 spheres are reflected in Malchus. Yet Malchus is the king. In other words, and explained in Chassidus, that ein melech b'lo yam. A king is not a king without a subject. So a king on his own is nothing. He needs subjects. Right? A rabbi, a rebbe, a leader, if he doesn't have balabatim, he's nothing. He could be the biggest genius and know everything. He needs to have balabatim, supporters, and people who listen to his shiurim and want his direction for him to be the rabbi, the rebbe. So that's why Malchus Menashe on its own is poor. It's poor in the sense of it's very needy. What's its need? Being recognized by the subjects. Ashir, a wealthy man, doesn't need anybody. He's on top of the game. So that's why when David HaMelech says, when it says in Tehillim, Tfilu le'oni chiyate v'lefnei Hashem yishpach sichai, what we're going to learn now, the Baal Shem Tov teaches us, you know why he's able to pour his heart out? Because he has nothing. And because he has nothing, it's pure. So he says, Hashem, I only have you. Help me. But if you come in wealthy, it's difficult or impossible to pray from the heart. Over the years, I saw this also, in fundraising, different things. People came from wealthy homes or wealthy, and they went out to do Chabad work. When it came time to asking people to support, to give money, some of them had a difficult time. It was like, it's hard for them to ask for money because they come from money. I'm not saying everyone, but I've seen it and I thought about a lot about it. In other words, it's much harder for someone who comes from wealth or, to ask someone else to give because, I have what I need. I come from a place so you have to really work on yourself and understand, like Rabbi Josh Gordon used to always say, and he didn't come from wealth, far from it. I mean, we knew his father and his family. But, if you feel that what you're asking is not for yourself, but for the cause, then it makes no difference. But that takes a lot to come to that point. It takes a lot to come to that point. In other words, do you truly, in your request, are you truly asking for self or for cause? And it's a very refined thing, you should know. Because at the end of the day, and I've seen this too, and I'm sure you've seen, people ask for a cause, but they benefit from the cause. That's not what we're talking about. And I'm not saying it's not kosher. And I knew someone who was the head of a school, and he told me once, if I eat steak, I want my employees to eat steak as well. What right do I have to eat steak if I don't give them enough salary for them to eat steak? Then why am I entitled? So when David HaMelech says, Lifnei Hashem yishpach sichai, before Hashem I pour out my heart, understand that he was able to do that because he's Spheres HaMalchus. Because he's the 10th Sphera, which on its own is poor. Who makes him a melech? The subjects. Let's continue in the text. She'einem mevakesh shum davar. The Ani doesn't ask for anything. V'tfilosehi shelefnei Hashem yishpach sichai. What is the content of his prayer? Pouring his heart out for Hashem. See, I didn't explain that earlier. It's not that he's pouring out his heart to Hashem, give me this, give me that. No. I want to talk to you, God. That's all. In other words, I'm going to say this, whether you're listening or not, it's irrelevant to me. Because again, if you're pouring your heart out on the condition that he listens to you, you're not genuine. You have an agenda. That means you're not poor. That means you're coming already conditioned. So when David HaMelech says, Isser, Lefnei Hashem Yishbach Sichoi, the Rebbe says, look what the Rebbe says, She'einem Mevakesh Shum Dover. And V'tfilosei he, what is the content of his prayer? Shelefnei Hashem Yishbach Sichoi. Ulozeh tzarech pikkas gedola. For this you need to be very bright, very shrewd. Uvedug bas melech basav adam, comparable to a king of flesh and blood. Shebetei likonis lakitin sheboi nimtza melech. In order for him, when he goes into the chamber of the king, v'liris es pnei melech, and he sees the face of the king. Tzarech lavrit chila derech kama v'kama cholos. He has to go through the corridor, where there are many, many chambers and rooms, and each one there is a mass amount of wealth and riches and art and culture and all of that. I love this part. And there are those, as they walk with the king, they're behind the king, and they see, oh wow, look at this room, look at this art, look at these, right? They're all on the outside rooms of the king. They have such tremendous pleasure. You hear that? They get stuck there. They have to see the art, the riches. But the king is walking forward to his chamber. And then there are those that they have pleasure from more type of, things that they see. The daf kemi, top of the next page. The daf kemi shu chochem gadol, specifically someone who's a wise man, in our words of the Medrash, a pikeach, shrewd guy. In Yiddish now, look at the Yiddish words. Top of 240. Gate im nit on. In simple English, I'm going to say it, he don't give a damn. Gate im nicht on. He don't care. Hachashivas vayokar shalahain otzum. All the wealth and prestige and riches. Hanimtza gam behechal achi pnimi, that's found inside the king's palace, the closest room to the king's chamber. So the Cholet Tzainovich Yukose, and he has one desire, and I just want to get into, I want to just go into the chamber of the king. And what do you want to do there? The riches are outside. No, I want to see the face of the king. I heard, I don't know if it's true, but Rabbi Yoel, shortly before he passed away, Rabbi Yoel Kadmon Shpia, he said he just wishes he could see the Rebbe one last time before he passes on. Again, I wasn't there, but the saying itself to me is worth $1 million. It's so true. In other words, there is in a relationship, what do I get out of it? Even spiritual things. A Rebbe. What do I get from a Rebbe? For one person, I get from a Rebbe that he gives me a bracha so my kid can go to the chuppah and have a good marriage and a good family. For another person, he says, no. I get from the Rebbe ruchnius. But it's about you. So you're looking to get. Then there is, I don't want to get anything. I want to be. That's what we're talking about. In other words, you come to a place in your psyche, your persona, in your being, that you see this tzaddik as a representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the best way, and therefore, you want to be. you want to be. And that's what the Medrash is saying. And that's why it takes a very shrewd person not to get caught up in all of the fascinations, because it's so easy to get caught up with all kinds of fascinations. And the same is true for Yocheved in Eretz Yisrael. I've said it and I say it again, because I think about this a lot. Here we are in the middle of a war. Every day, you know, Baruch Hashem, by you guys it's not as much, but when my daughter lives in Tel Aviv, it's nonstop, right? And you ask yourself, hey, you could live anywhere outside, you know, and we don't have these missiles. We have many other issues. And the answer is that's the Mesiras Nefesh. To be in Eretz HaKodesh, to be in Eretz Yisrael. And there's no logic like, oh, I'm there because my kids will have a better chinuch. You know, that's also true. But at the end of the day, this is really the Torah, the mitzvah of being in Eretz Yisrael, and all of that is Kedushas Haaretz, Eretz HaKodesh. And by the way, for that matter, it's everywhere in Eretz Yisrael. You know, people, I have to be Dafke in Yerushalayim, Dafke in Bet Shemesh, Dafke here. Who says? You'd like to be in Yerushalayim so you could walk to the Kaisel. Thank you very much. That's again self. Ruchnius is self. It's not as coarse as Gashmius, but it's self. The person comes to the understanding that wherever I am in Eretz Yisrael, it's Kedushas Haaretz. That's it. That's it. If the Eibishter wants you to be there, you'll end up there. The Rebbe, when he told people, came to him, you know, and rabbis, young Gizel rabbis, and others who retired in America, and they said, oh, we want to live in Yerushalayim. And the Rebbe said, you're going to waste your time, you're going to become bored, you don't have what to do, and because you think you'll teach, and they're saturated with teachers. Go out to a yeshuv, or go out to Tel Aviv, or go out somewhere where you'll have a purpose. Havana, we'll continue tomorrow and think about what we learned. Have a great day.